Hello and welcome to Aucademy. I'm Annette Foster, an autistic academic and self-advocate and artist, and I'm hosting the show today with Katie Monday, which is here, and we're looking at working. Our guest today is Marianthi. I don't want to pronounce your last name wrong because I'm really dyslexic. So it's Kourti. You say it for Kourti?
Kourti. Okay. Yeah, it's phonetic.
Kourti. It's beautiful. You'll be talking about a book that you've edited that came out in, was it December?
October.
Oh, sorry. Gosh. Working with autistic, transgender, and non-binary people. Which is going to be fabulous. And yes, Katie has the book there with lots of amazing. And I love that you have so somebody gave that to you?
Yes, it was an unexpected Christmas present from a friend. I just got a pillowcase with a book printed on it. And they didn't even tell me, I just opened the package someday and I saw it, what's that? And it took a while to realize that it wasn't anything from the publishing house or anything like that. And it was a gift from a friend. Until I found the card. I'm lucky to have very lovely friends.
Okay, so just to get started, we usually kind of introduce ourselves just to be incredibly as accessible as we can by describing how we look physically for blind people or who someone might be listening. And I was just wondering if Katie, because usually Katie, you're very good at doing this. You're super detailed, and I'm always jealous after you've described yourself because I feel I was so undescriptive. So could you go first?
Yeah, of course. So I am sitting in my front room at the moment in front of some rather hideous green curtains that we haven't changed since we moved here. I'm a white person with kind of short, dark, mousy hair, maybe. It's a bit messy. I've got round glasses, big round glasses that ombre from kind of dark brown into orange at the bottom. I've got green eyebrow piercing in today and 2 silver studs, and I'm wearing my usual bright green hoodie, which is zipped. Well, it is a zip up hoodie, but it's never zipped up, and my usual black t-shirt that's got Rey Mysterio on it, obviously, because I love wrestling.
Fabulous. And I'm Annette Foster again. I am a white middle-aged woman, I suppose, with long blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm wearing a purple and black kind of sport jumper, which has the fabulous thumb holes, which I love. Anything that has a thumb hole, I'm totally into. Very, very stimmy. I'm sitting actually in my partner's kitchen/living area today because they're upstairs doing a talk on their computer. So we're kind of double interneting it today. And it's all red, which is quite cool. And we've got some Christmas lights over here, yes, which we still have on because we have autistic inertia and haven't taken them down. Okay. Marianthi, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Marianthi. I am a very light-skinned person. I'm wearing round glasses and I have a nose ring, septum piercing thing. I'm wearing grey headphones. I'm wearing a shirt that is I can't even see it on the camera. I have to do this. That is yellow with black stripes that a lot of people have pointed out that makes me look like a bee, which is not a bad thing. And behind me, I'm on my sofa, which is green, and I have the pillow that my friend gave me with the book cover on it, which is like a blue cover with 3 circles on it. One is like red, the other is purple, and the other is green. And when they intersect, it's like a darker purple, a lighter blue, and yellow, and white in the middle, and 3 people walking towards each other. And it says, working with autistic, transgender, and non-binary people, research, practice, and experience, edited by Marianthi Kourti. And yes, I think that's it.
Fabulous. Thank you. That was super good. Both of you. Still both more detailed than me as usual, but I'll get to it. So we usually just start with kind of a questions about who you are and what is your dedicated interest or specialism. So I don't know, Katie, do you want to go first again?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
It's a big part of why we're talking with Marianthi today, or at least why I'm here anyways, because a big interest of mine at the moment is trans and or non-binary autistic experiences from both a personal point of view, but also I work with a lot of autistic young people who are very gender divergent and gender non-compliant, which is a word I quite like, and just kind of expressing themselves in the way that they want to. And also from an academic point of view, I do trans and or non-binary autistic, like collecting narratives, and then how people like myself and the people I've been talking to would like to make recommendations for future research on our experiences and our lives and kind of stuff like that. So that's my main interest at the moment. And like my other little interests are kind of reading fantasy books and watching wrestling.
Fabulous. So yeah, I'm Annette Foster again. I just finished my PhD, which was looking at women, cis and trans and non-binary people's experience of being autistic through kind of live art and performance and visual art. And I was really inspired by participatory autism research and took that as a model for what I did for my PhD. And obviously, I'm very interested in this topic as well. I discovered after I was, well, that's another question. But anyways, I discovered basically that I was non-binary several, about 10 years after I discovered I was autistic. And I think that kind of unmasking of being autistic, it's interconnected really for me, and made me understand that I was also masking my gender. Yeah, so that's me. Marianthi?
So I am originally from Greece, and that's where I grew up. And I don't know why I started with that. I think that was going to go to the next question about how did you find out you're autistic? But anyway, so I'll save the rest for the next question. So my PhD is on autism and gender. It started with a master's where I interviewed people from autistic women's groups, but they weren't. Many of them weren't autistic women. As a master's, about their experiences about being diagnosed in adulthood, and I got an article out for that. I think it's in the chat. I don't know if everybody can see it, but yeah, it's there. And so now I'm doing a PhD, hoping to finish at some point this year, about how autistic people form a sense of gender identity. So in general, I work a lot around gender. I also hosted a conference in 2018, organized a conference about autism, gender, and sexuality. I also work as a research associate in the Manchester Metropolitan University in a project about autism and intimacy. And we've spent the first sort of part of this project looking at social policy and how it talks about support or doesn't talk about support for autistic people in terms of their intimacy. So that's something else that I'm doing. And I guess other interests, like I'm very monotropic with my interests. Everything is like autism and something else. One of the hardest things for me is like, oh, tell us something that you do for fun that isn't work. And I was like, what do you mean? Work is fun. And then when I finish work, I think about work, and that's also fun. So the other, I guess, recent thing that I did that I kind of enjoyed doing is I published an article about the philosophy of autism and critical realism and autism. And I think if you go on my Twitter, it's my pinned thing there, so you can find it there. And if you fancy a philosophy headache for the evening after the gender headache, I've got you covered. And yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot to talk about what I'm really interested in. Obviously, autistic experience is incredibly, and trans autistic experience is incredibly important to me, and I would say, one of my special interests or dedicated interest. I also really like, I've been taking Argentine tango lessons, dancing lessons for a couple of years now. I had a bit of a break, obviously, because nobody was dancing during the major pandemic, but started up again. So I'm really enjoying that. I also like snowboarding, and art is a massive, dedicated interest, which I've done my whole life, and in a lot of ways helped me discover a lot of things about myself. Still discovering things about myself, but yeah, I didn't say that, so that's great. And yeah, I actually I referenced you in my PhD, Marianthi. I don't feel like a gender. I feel like myself. So that was yeah. So your reference to my PhD, that was great. Great to. I mean, I always try to look at many autistic authors as possible, because I think that's incredibly important, and to get our views out there, because that's great. Okay, so yes, so the next question. When did you discover you were autistic? I don't know. Okay.
So,
yeah. Oh yeah. No, you go first, Marianthi. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's interesting with me because, well, you'll find out why. My undergrad, like I said, I grew up in Greece, and that's where I did my undergrad. I left at the age of 22, I think, 23. So I finished my undergrad degree in Greece. That was on special education, because I was very. My mom said, "Why don't you do general education?" I was like, "I don't want to teach normal kids. What? No, I don't want to do that. Not having any sort of influence from my environment, like for no reason. I just my when I chose my degree, I guess my logic was, well, these kids bullied me my entire life. I'm not gonna like help them learn.
Yeah.
The poor kids that I was gonna help learn, obviously, had never met me before. But anyway, just my own traumatic experiences of education was like, I don't know. So throughout my 4 years of studying in special education in Greece, I became obsessed with autism. Like, I couldn't stop talking about autism and how cool autistic kids are and how amazing they are. And everybody was like, "You have this incredible talent with autism. You just get them. How do you do this?" And I was like, "I don't know. How do you not?" I don't understand the question. And like, everybody would see that autistic people would be like, or autistic kids would be like drawn to me, and we would just hang out. And I used to go like at the summer camps as a carer for disabled people, and I would gel with like every autistic kid there, and they would all like follow me around, and we will all play together and run in circles and stim around. And everybody else was like, "What are you doing? Like, you're going so like above and beyond what your job is for no reason. Like, you're not going to get paid more to do that." And I was like, "I get paid to do that?" So, but through all of that, I graduated, and I didn't realize I was autistic, having read everything that was ever given to me about autism. And it was a running joke between me and my friends that I'm being autistic again, but we all thought like that I couldn't possibly be autistic. I just have some autistic traits. And then it was after I graduated, I had a student at school who didn't, because I basically learned nothing about autistic people without learning disabilities at university. And I had somebody who didn't have learning disabilities at school. So I was like, I need to figure out how to teach this kid, like, just because nobody taught me anything about it. That's not his fault. And I went on YouTube, and I stumbled upon an autistic adult called the Anmish, who was talking about her experiences back in 2012 on YouTube about being autistic. And like, after all the books and all the Fritz and all of that, I watched her videos and I went, "What's happening?" And that's how I started. Sort of, I found out that I was autistic, and that's kind of what changed my career as well, because I came in the UK. My master's is autism in children, even though I didn't do anything about children during my master's, because I had just found out about myself. So I pitched this idea for my dissertation, and everybody was incredibly excited. And so my personal sort of discovery of myself happened very much a long time, kind of my career development. So it was, the whole thing was very kind of interlinked and very organic. So that's how I found out I'm autistic.
I think that's a common experience a lot of people do, where they're so interested and they have this affinity with autistic people, and they think people are like, oh, you're an autistic whisperer. And you're like, no, actually, I was just autistic. I understood them. But also that all the literature that is out there is written by most of the literature, and especially before I was diagnosed, I was diagnosed at 39, was written by non-autistic people who are looking at it from an outsider's perspective, looking in. And it's not until you hear it from an insider's perspective and you hear from autistic people that you actually go, oh, that's what being autistic is. Oh, I thought it was something else. I thought it was all that other stuff they were talking about, which I didn't relate to at all. And I think it's super interesting to think about that. But yeah, so Katie, do you want to, I just went into a rant, but yeah. How did you discover you were autistic?
I suppose mine's very similar, actually, but my academics came later. So I've been running a social group for disabled kids and coaching wheelchair basketball for probably 6 or 7 years now. And although it's a kind of mixed group, a lot of the kids we work with are autistic. And again, it was just like, oh, yeah, I go around making cat noises. And yeah, I can understand why you get annoyed by hand dryers, or you don't like going into crowded spaces, or you know, a myriad of things, like if we do sensory play and stuff like that, or even just you know, we can go out in like the dead of winter and some of our kids are just not wearing coats, and the parents always have a bit of a laugh at me because I'm always wearing shorts. So like at work I wear shorts all year round, doesn't matter what we're doing. If I didn't have to run after children who like to run around quite a lot, I would be wearing flip-flops all year round as well. And then it's only when you start doing that and you do the care plans with the young people, when you go around and they get started with the group, so you think, yeah, I could be writing this about myself. So that was my kind of 5 years ago now. And yeah, and then I got my formal diagnosis probably a couple of years after that, just because I thought it would kind of help me with uni, which it has done. And then got into academics kind of vaguely based off that. And now I'm doing my master's because I was thinking, a lot of the children we work with are very expressive in their gender and not perhaps in a way that society sees as typical. And it seems to be happening quite often. And I also work in other settings with non-disabled children, and that seemed to be happening less, or at least I could see it or pick up on it less. So that just seemed interesting for me. And then you read stuff like Marianthi's work and Lydia XZ Brown's work and stuff like that, and it all started making sense to me. And that's obviously what I'm kind of researching now.
Awesome. Thank you. I mean, yeah, for me, I didn't know anything about autistic people. And it was 2011, and I had kind of suffered with my mental health. I mean, I had mental health issues my entire life. And at that point, I was like, well, nothing's working. I've been to counselors. I've talked to all sorts of people, done CBT. I've taken lots of medication. I have for years. And, you know, I'm not getting better like everybody else. And, you know, there's something else going on. And I just kept hounding my, my GP for about 10 years to get help. That's how long it took. And I finally ended up talking to a psychologist, and I talked to them for about half an hour, and they said, you know what, I think what you're describing, I think you're autistic. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that. Obviously a long time ago, 2011. Then I went in and to get the diagnosis, which with actually quite a really cool team. Damon, you're not going to be able to do that. Yeah. And sorry, telling my partner off for being in the kitchen trying to eat peanut butter and chocolate. Chocolate dipped in peanut butter. Yeah, that's their snack.
Oh.
They can eat it. It's fine. Just not in here because it's making noise. But I remember, sitting across from the psychiatrist or psychologist, and they said, I don't think you're autistic. And I said, I don't either. And then halfway through the process, we both went, oh my God, you are so autistic. And, I think for both of us, things completely changed then. But that completely changed my career as well. And I decided that I'd always wanted to do a PhD as an artist. But I felt like it was really important for me to kind of be able to articulate my experience through work about being autistic. So I ended up doing a PhD, and that was, 5 years ago. Well, that was a long time ago, but 5 years ago, I started the PhD. And I remember we met Marianthi at the first Autscape I ever went to. And we were because they had small groups. If people don't know, Autscape is actually an amazing conference and a retreat for autistic people, where for the first time in my life, I was part of a group of autistic people. I wasn't a minority. We were actually the majority. Amazing experience if anybody has the opportunity to do that. I know it's been online, so it's actually been more accessible for a lot of people in the last couple of years. But it's also really great to be in the same space. So I'm hoping, we'll see what happens in the next year or so. But yeah, it was great to meet you there. And kind of, I feel like...
We went steam toy shopping together.
Did we?
I had in the in the second Autscape we were together. We went steam toy shopping.
Oh yes.
I remember us sitting outside the what was that, the common room or the dining room or something, and going on eBay and just adding things to my cart that are steam toys and going, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And then when I go home, I got all of them together, and now whenever I see them around the house, I'm like, oh. And I remember that sort of really, really cute moment we had together.
It was, yeah. And I'm still doing it. I actually got this for Christmas, which I'm loving. Nice. It's like a happy set. Well, it's a sad one. I'm happy though. I'm quite liking it. And I want to put it on my head, which I know is something that Katie, you like to do, is put things on your head.
Mm-hmm. It's my favorite.
It is your favorite.
Yeah.
Okay. So Marianthi, do you want to just kind of describe, introduce the book to the readers, to the people here at Aucademy?
Yeah, sure. So the book is called Working with Autistic, Transgender, and Non-Binary People. It started, so in 2018, I got funding to organize a conference on autism, gender, and sexuality. And to my knowledge, it was the first conference ever on this specific intersection of things. And it was, it was really good. It was really interesting. It was a lot of work, but I enjoyed doing it. Oh, I have a cat, and you can see her ears in the corner of the screen. Yeah, well, sorry. She doesn't like being stroked. Oh. Relatable.
Yeah.
And after that conference, Jessica Kingsley contacted me and asked whether I would be interested in putting together a book for around this sort of topic of the conference. And I was like, well, I feel like I have to now. You don't just have a publisher approach you and ask you to do something you're really interested in, and you go, nah, never mind. So, and what they have issued and published a variety of books on the topic in the last few years. There's also a book they published with also two autistic editors who has a lot of personal stories. And there's also Finn Gratton's book, who is also autistic, who is a mix of personal and professional experience. So what they were looking for me specifically was a book specifically targeting professionals, or at least mainly targeting professionals. And I was a little bit skeptical at first when they first said the idea. I was like, but I work for autistic people. But then I thought, well, if I don't do it, someone else will. And all spaces need to be reclaimed. And if there is a need for this that the publisher has identified, I know that at least I will try to bring as many autistic voices as possible in the forefront, and have professionals learn from autistic people. And so that's how it started. I should also say that initially I started with another co-editor who, as the process went on, he couldn't sort of stay with it, for just life got too much and stuff. But he's still a co-author in one of the chapters, so he's still included in the book, which I'm very happy about. And that started in October, around September 2018. That process, and I ended up submitting it January 2021. So it was a long time.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the publisher was kind with extensions, and I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm not done yet." So need a bit more time. They're like, "That's fine, that's okay." So that was nice. And the book itself is split into 3 sections. That's where the cover says research, practice, and experience. But in the first part, there is the introduction, which I wrote. The first part is called Theory at the Intersection of Autism and Trans and or Non-Binary Experiences. I'm looking on the side because I have the book here. Starting with the introduction that I wrote. And then there's a chapter by Damien Milton, who I feel like needs no introduction, called Here Comes Trouble, Autism and Gender Performance. And in this chapter, he talks about, basically introduces readers who haven't had much exposure to social sciences and their approach to gender and sexuality, about kind of the framework they need to have to think about autistic gender in a more social sciences sort of way. Because again, the other thing with this book is that it's not for one discipline, it's for many disciplines. So people from a variety of disciplines contributed to it, but obviously every discipline has something that the other disciplines don't have that they need to know. So that was part of that idea. And it was also, of course, who better to explain kind of how society works and autistic people in society than kind of one of the lead social theorists we have right now, right? And just
for anyone that doesn't know, Damien Milton is
he's
an autistic. We've talked about him and interviewed him on Aucademy, but if people don't know, he is an autistic academic and author. He also has an autistic son, and he kind of came up with something that's been key to our community, which is the double empathy problem, which basically takes all the blame of a miscommunication between non-autistic and autistic people off the autistic person and says, no, it's a two-way street. Non-autistic people lack empathy when it comes to understanding autistic people. So yeah, go ahead, Marianthi.
Yes. The second chapter is called Beyond for Your Own Good: Youth Liberation, Disability Justice, and the Importance of Autonomy in the Lives of Autistic Transgender Children. And it's written by Shane Newmeyer, who's a lawyer and disability activist in the US. And they talk about how to think about autistic transgender children without pathologizing them effectively, and how to support them in their journey of understanding themselves, and how to help them have the autonomy that they deserve, and also kind of highlight all the barriers that people trying to do that might face along the way, because we live in a very ableist and transphobic society, and kind of what to do to support autistic transgender children. And it was important for me to have a chapter that specifically focuses on underage people, because especially like, I feel like when the conference happened and I first started writing about the book, yes, people were talking about autistic trans people, but it was mostly among us. And then by the end, by the time the book was ready to come out, that's a huge thing, and it became almost like a focal point of like TERF discourse as well, which was something that was so interesting for me to see how much TERFs used the pathologizing of autism to stop people from being trans. So I think I needed something to sort of address all of those things. And then the next chapter is called Autistic Cognition and Gender Identity, Real Struggles and Imaginary Deficits. And it's written by Rubes Walsh and David Jackson Perry. And Rubes Walsh is an autistic neuroscientist, autistic trans neuroscientist, whose PhD is, yeah, they're a very, very incredibly cool person who I can just talk to forever.
Yeah.
And they introduce in this chapter, and David Jackson Perry was the person that was initially started sort of helping me to put the book together, and was together with me or co-organized the conference, and just we have a very close working relationship. And in this chapter they introduce kind of ideas based in neuroscience of how to not pathologize autistic gender, and why autistic people's brains might be more perceptible to variance in general. And specifically they introduced three sort of different theories, and they all kind of complete one another. The one is the theory of flattened priors, which basically its idea is that autistic people have most people have based their understanding of the world on their prior experiences or their prior knowledge. So most people have steep priors, but autistic people actually have flattened priors, and so they don't use their previous experiences as much. They just use what is in the moment, and assess the situation more for the information they have in the moment. They talk about the bottom-up processing. So most people have top-down processing, but autistic people have bottom-up processing, which again is a similar process to that. And then the imperfect systems, that a lot of people perceive systems to be a whole, that and they trust them just because they're systems. But autistic people are really able to pick systems apart and pick out inconsistencies in systems. And gender is one of the most inconsistent systems out there. I don't think, like, if you think the umbrella of things that we look under gender, from clothes to workplace to hair to who washes the dishes to who gets to be prime minister and why, to which songs, which celebrities are going to sing and why and how, and whose video clip is going to look how based on their gender and how people perceive it. It's just a ridiculous thing. And I think we are able to see that more so than perhaps many people who aren't autistic. So it talks a bit about that and how that works. And the last chapter of this section is called Trans Autistic and BIPOC, Living at the Intersections of Autism, Race and Gender Diversity. And it's co-authored by Taylor Renee Kilsgard and Lydia XZ Brown, who are both activists, American activists. And they're both, the first person is an indigenous non-binary person, and the second is a non-East Asian, I guess, American person. And they talk about kind of how race plays into our understanding of autism and gender, and the differences that autistic people of color will have in their lives compared to autistic trans white people and autistic trans people of color, how kind of what different things they might need sort of support with, but also how the whole idea of gender as it is now is very Eurocentric and very white anyway.
Mm.
And one of my favorite things, I think, from the entire book is in this chapter, where they say that, like, if you're born as part of a tribe that doesn't assign you a gender at birth, then whatever you end up identifying in life later on, you're by default not transgender. Because transgender means I was assigned thing X and then I became thing Y. So if you've never assigned thing X, then whatever you become is who you are.
Wow.
So kind of a less...
Can you imagine society if it was like that? You know, Western society, if it was like that?
I know,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it makes you think of the usage of all the LGBTQ plus labels as well, and how important they are to people. That, of course, and you know, and they are important to me, but they're important because they are a vehicle for sort of advocating for rights. And if in a world where everything would have been acceptable, we wouldn't have needed the labels to begin with. We wouldn't have needed those categories. We only need them because we didn't have them. So people didn't think they exist, and we had to go, hey, hi, we're here. Same with autism, same with a lot of invisible, you know, oppressions.
Yeah, definitely.
So
I just wanted to say, Katie is coming back. They lost internet connection, and it looks like they're getting help to get back on in a minute, just so everybody knows. But go ahead, Marianthi.
That's good.
We've got a
I'm
question.
a young people's mentor, and I work with lots of neurodivergent people. Trying to find counselors/therapists that understands LGBTQ plus is hard, and trying to find counselors/therapists that understand neurodivergent people who identify as LGBTQ plus is even harder, especially in the UK. Tell me about it. There is definitely a place for your book to help educate people. Thank you so much for your hard work producing this book. Oh, thank you. Thank you for engaging with it. I think it's good to know that there are people who will use it and will, you know.
Yeah, I think
like it.
Yeah, it is very hard.
But I think, I mean, later on in my chapter, kind of the chapter that I wrote with one of my mentees, I kind of talk about that, how because of the way expertise are segregated, you're either going to get queer LGBTQ plus experts, or you're going to get autistic experts, and you're rarely going to get like both. So so when I was writing this book, I was part of it was like, am I talking to autistic professionals who have LGBTQ plus clients? And I think for the most part, maybe that's what the publisher had in mind. But then I also thought, but maybe a lot of autistic people are going to end up in like LGBTQ plus services. Hello,
you're back! Yay!
You know, sorry, Marianthi, I'm probably interrupting what you're saying, but you know when your laptop keeps telling you to do updates, and because you think, oh, I'll do that next time, and then my laptop's just gone, no. Sorry, so carry on. I'm with you.
I've actually been doing that for a couple of years because I'm afraid Mendeley won't fit with what was it? Word. I'm worried that all my references will go or something, so I haven't done it. So I totally get it. Go ahead, Marianthi.
Yeah, so I was saying that I also thought that there are like professionals who work mainly with LGBT people. Who might need to know more things about autistic people, because so many autistic people are trans and non-binary. Somebody who works with trans people will inevitably come across autistic people in their work. So the next section is, again, much more focused on specifically on professionals. and it's called Working at the Intersection of Autism and Trans and Non-Binary Experiences. And the first chapter is written by, I believe this is the only solely neurotypically authored, no, I believe, I'm pretty sure, in fact, is the only chapter in the whole book that was written by a neurotypical exclusively. But it's written by a professional who works at gender identity clinics. So it was a quite important addition, because as much as, we want to talk about aspects of gender that aren't medical, a lot of people need gender identity clinics and go to gender identity clinics. And as we know from experience, the more medicalized the setting is, the more difficult it is to get through to them sometimes. So it was important for me, was an important addition for that. But also, I very much like that this professional was very open to working with me with the standards that I set for the book. And I said, you know what? No, with autism, like if you can write it like that if that's how you're used to talking, but just know that I'm going to edit it. And she goes, yeah, that's absolutely fine. You're the editor. And, a part of what I'm doing this is I want to learn to be better with my language. And I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. Thank you. And it's nice to know that there are people like that out there, even in fields that we would consider, maybe not the most receptive.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Of trans spaces. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was like, oh, I wanted to say something there as well about, from my experience and working on my PhD as well. I had one person who was part of a LGBTQ plus group, and they were working with me in my workshops, and they were like, oh my gosh, I've got all these friends in my LGBT group that I think are autistic. Yeah. And that crossover is just so strong. And a lot of times someone will be autistic and discover they're trans, but, or and then there's also loads of, trans or LGBTQ people that actually end up discovering they're autistic. It's kind of a really interesting crossover.
Yeah, Chloe's right. We got a comment on the screen saying, in my experience of trans spaces, autistic/neurodivergent people are the majority anyway, which is what prompted this a little tangent. But yes, so the next chapter of this section is called Reflections on the Spectra of Autism and Gender Identity, Considerations for Professionals Supporting Autistic, Transgender, and Non-Binary People. And it's written by Wen Lawson, who, again, in my mind, needs no introduction. But basically, for those of you who don't know him, he's an autistic trans man who's one of the oldest autistic, not oldest in age, oldest in time of working in the field, autistic advocates out there. And it's very much, if you come across this, do this. If this happens, do that. Very hands-on advice for people, for professionals, and very much sort of all of these worries you might have are good worries, but never put them above listening to the people you have in front of you, which obviously is a very important message. And the last chapter of this section I wrote with one of my students, because the other thing that I didn't mention is that I work as a specialist mentor for autistic university students. And I have been since I graduated, since 2014. And I met a lot of autistic trans students through that. And I think it's particularly interesting because it's, for a lot of them, it's the first time they leave their homes. So it's the first time they can go, yes, gender, what is up with that? So even though this my job isn't to talk about that, they talk to me about that. So not only is it that you should let the student lead, but also I'm the oil to the fire, as it were. And I was like, yeah, let's pick some holes in that sort of concept together. So, and I'm talking about, but in this chapter, I'm talking about specifically practical advice that I think professionals who work with autistic people might need to take into considerations. And one of the, I guess, the key points that I want people to take from it is how easily it can be to out somebody through documents. And I think especially with autistic people, we often don't know the amount of paperwork that is kept for us if we engage in services. Like if you engage with social services is going to have a folder on you. If you engage with university services is going to have a folder on you. Your GP is going to have a folder on you. Your psychiatrist, other people are going to have a folder on you. And lots of different people are going to have lots of different folders on you that has a lot of information in it. So for professionals that work with autistic people, they have to understand that they need to be super clear to their people they're working with, their clients, whatever, who knows what, because the autistic person won't know the structure of the organization. So you might actually want to be nice and gender the person correctly in the notes, and then you've outed them to your entire organization, which may not be safe. But then also, I think the other thing that people may not think about is how you can out somebody retroactively. So, for example, let's say somebody is, a trans man, right, who has fully transitioned and is fully perceived as a man. So everybody sees them as a man now. So he doesn't need to come out and say what his pronouns are. Or obviously, we should ask, but we all know that people don't ask. And suddenly, this random person, because of a referral that took like 6 years, takes documents about him that has the wrong name and the wrong pronouns. So you're outing somebody and putting them in danger without necessarily realizing that that's what you're doing. And that's because you haven't updated your paperwork. And what I'm saying is that the good thing about paperwork is just basically a find and replace thing. So it's not like as complicated as people want to think. Like write however you write, because obviously we need to be. Ashley Gilbert asks if I'm open and non-binary in my job. Yes, I am lucky because I work on autism and gender. So I feel like if I'm not open, then who's gonna be?
I am as well. The same reason. Yeah.
But I use it with the students, for example. I use it like nowadays with Zoom. So my Zoom is like Marianthi Kourti, they, them. So they're like, oh, okay. And all of them are like, oh, I'm going to try to do my best to remember that sort of thing. I've never had a student being like, oh, what's up with that? And for a lot of them, it has been an opportunity to just tell me about their own things. So yes. So, I mean, these are some of the things that I cover in that chapter, and more so to just, I guess, put some things into context and help people think about some things that they may not necessarily occur to them otherwise. And in the last section of the book is called Living at the Intersection of Autism and Trans and Non-Binary Experiences. And the first chapter of that section is called Autism, Gender Variance, and Alexithymia, Overlap, Implications, and Recommendation for Practice, written by Alyssa Hillary Zisk and Joe Minchin. And this was a topic that basically, among the three of us, we decided it's really important, and research isn't going to pick it up for the next 10 years. So we might as well be as ahead of the curve as possible and just write something about it. So Alyssa was kind enough to contribute their experiences with autism, gender variance, and alexithymia, and Joe was kind enough to contribute their knowledge on autism and alexithymia, which is something they are very interested in. And sort of I picked one from here and one from there, and it's like, oh, you're writing a chapter together now, surprise. And that's how that came up.
And just for people who don't know, we've talked about it quite a bit, but alexithymia is in relation to not being able to identify your emotions to a certain extent. I mean, a lot of times it relates to people that also have problems with interception. So their perception of what's happening on the inside of their body. So maybe not knowing every time when to you need to go to the bathroom, or in the last minute or things like that, which I struggle with sometimes.
Yes, so emotions and bodily sensations in general. And research on it is quite fascinating. And Joe calls it social gaslighting, which I think is a very appropriate term for it, because it's like if this noise constantly kind of bothers you, but it doesn't bother anyone else, everyone else tells you that no, that's not a thing. That's not something to be bothered by, but you're bothered by it. And so.
And then you ended up, pretending that you're not bothered by it, and
yes, to the point that you lose connection with your own understanding of the world, because you've learned to ignore every input ever. So yeah, so I think that's and it's really interesting with gender variance as well, because the whole narrative around being trans in particular is like, oh, my inside doesn't match my outside. But if you don't understand your inside, how that works?
How do you understand your outside? Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. And how are you supposed to explain dysphoria with physical body parts if you are so dissociated from yourself that you don't know how you feel about them anymore? So these are the things that kind of are covered in this chapter.
Oh, Katie, I just want to quickly ask Katie, because I think Katie wanted to speak for a minute.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the kind of overarching idea that a lot of people have about, especially trans-binary people, about, well, I've always been this way, or I've always felt this way, and I was always this gender trapped in another body or whatever, which obviously isn't everyone. It's certainly not my experience of things anyway. But if you're constantly explained, or that seems to be the one, the trans truth, if you will, it's very difficult to kind of, when you're already confused about your emotions and your feelings and your interoception and how your body moves and stuff like that, then trying to pick apart trans narratives that seem to be, kind of overarching ideas of what it means to be trans, as if there's just one universal experience of it. I think that becomes more complicated because it's not, for me, something that haven't felt like I've been non-binary in a certain body for all these years. It's just, I don't know if that makes sense. I think that's possibly a bit confusing as well,
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because me and Chloe we did a really 2-day conference on neurodiversity this week with the team that we've been we have a postdoc with, which is Attune, and we're looking at young people in relation to ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, but we talking about kind of also whether you think in pictures or not, and whether someone thinks in pictures. So if someone doesn't think in pictures, and I realized that I don't think in pictures that much, but I'm an artist, and I thought, no, I'm visual. I'm really visual. I have to think in pictures. But it took me ages. I did the test several times to realize that I don't. And I think because that's what you expect your whole life, because that's how human beings think. But also that's connected to a lot of people who have alexithymia as well, that those a lot of times go hand in hand. And I just wanted to do the Aucademy comment here, because we've got, it says, I think it's Chloe possibly. Exactly. We were asked by an autistic friend last week, how do you know if you feel like a woman, for instance, if you don't know how you feel anyways? This says it there, doesn't it?
I was probably going to bring this up in a minute when you went on to your third section about because when Olivia wrote her chapter, which is in the last section of the book, and she was talking about emulating neurotypical masculinity, and I just thought that rings so true, because if we find trouble emulating, masking, shielding, whatever you want to call it, just kind of typical standard everyday neurotypical stuff, and then trying to unpick stuff like sexuality and gender is so complex. And most people have this kind of understood about themselves in their teen years, and some of us, like Gwen, are coming at this, quite a few years after that, It's a lot to unpack, but in a world that isn't used to our way of thinking or being anyways, it's almost bloody impossible, really.
Yeah,
it is. And I think shielding is a great word. Me and Chloe both have been trying to use that more instead of masking, because I feel like that portrays more. We're not putting on a mask. We're not trying to hide from people. We're not camouflaging ourselves to be in guerrilla warfare. We're shielding ourselves from a world that is not fit for purpose for us, and actually a world that's quite hostile and violent towards autistic people and anything to do with autistic experience. And I think that's a great way to talk about it. And for me, I didn't discover I was non-binary into my late 40s. I'm 50, and I think I've just, basically come out in the last 2 years. And that was so tied up in me shielding my autistic identity as well, that not until I kind of started to sort that out did I actually realize, oh, there's my gender. Wait a second. I've been masking, I've been shielding that as well, and not really figuring it out.
And I think the other thing is that I find difficult is the expectation that you will have the one gender throughout your life.
Mm-hmm.
So like if something you didn't have it as a child, then it's not like valid, or it's not like something you have now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very interesting thing, because that is the case with a lot of like it's kind of the very core of essentialism, right? I've always been like this. It's who I am. And it's interesting because like there are other things that if they happen to people during their lives, we don't negate them as identities. Like if somebody becomes a parent and that becomes important to them, obviously they're not going to say, I've always been a parent, this is who I am. Like, you can still, obviously a lot of things can still be who you are and not be and be very important to you. But also a lot of things could have been who you've always been and not always be important to you. Like you're basically, other than gender, at birth, you're assigned a nationality, right?
Mm.
There's so many people who don't even think about their nationality as an important thing. Like it's just a tick box and they move on, and it's not a part of who they are. And so much so that like nowadays, if you hear somebody being like really passionate about their nationality, you're like, oh, okay. Don't know, especially in the West, with certain things like you but that is something you've always been. Like for me, being European wasn't an important thing. I was like, yeah. And then Brexit happened, and I was like, oh, okay. I guess I'm gonna have to think about that now. So like just because I'm somebody who, when I was younger, I did very strongly identify as a girl, and I didn't know non-binary people existed, but I don't know that necessarily would have changed my answer at that time, because I felt like I needed to live through that, and I needed to have some time on this earth living as that gender. And eventually I was like, okay, yeah, I did it for a few years. I don't like it anymore. I don't want to do it anymore, okay?
Yeah.
I want to do something else now. Cool.
This is awful. Bye. 2 stars, would not recommend.
Yeah. But also like I had some good experiences as a girl, and I had some things that I liked as a girl that I liked doing, and I don't want to like look back on my childhood, on the things that I enjoyed as a girl, and be like, oh, but you didn't know who you were. Like that's so dismissive of my 10-year-old self, my 15-year-old self, who, like everybody, knew who they were according to what they were given, so I can always just sit back and say, no, I wasn't given everything. And I wasn't given everything, on top of everything else. Like my dad is a priest. Hello. My family was is very religious. So I used the frameworks and the concepts that I have, but like to invalidate my own agency because of that, I think is also like a step too far. You know what I mean? Because everybody just uses what they're given. For me, like that doesn't mean that no human ever has agency and nobody's creative with even what they're given, because I can look back and I can still see ways in which I was transgressive and I was making things that were forced on me my own. and adapting them to my understanding and my sort of perceptions of the world and my, my everything. So we have a question that says, should we all try different genders to empathize with others and also work out which is ours?
I don't know.
I wouldn't say we should, in the sense of like, I wouldn't make, as much as I wouldn't make cisgenderism mandatory, I wouldn't make anything mandatory. But if you're drawn towards something, play with it. That's all I could say. Like, if you're drawn towards something, see what it gives you. Like, you may end up being like okay with what you were assigned, and that's okay. You might be like, yeah, I'm assigned that, but I don't care. Or you may be like, yes, I was assigned that and I really dislike it and I prefer this. And then 10 years say, like, I was assigned that and then I thought it was this, and then that's not the thing anymore, and now I'm this. Whatever, play with it.
I think we talked about that just like gender is a journey too, that it's not just, you're this and you're always that forever. I think, and we've got this comment here by Asher Gilbert, experimenting with gender should definitely be more accepted. Why should we have to be one thing and stick to it for life? That's boring anyways, which I quite like. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so going back to the chapters.
Yeah, back to the chapters.
Left. The next chapter is by Lexi Orchard, who also presented at the conference. And it's kind of an expansion on their presentation at the conference. And it's called The Resonant Self, Masking, Scripting, and Precognition in Autistic, Transgender, and Non-Binary People. And it basically talks about these ideas and how people can use them to pass as neurotypical or to pass as cisgender or to pass as straight or, all of the above, because that's what their environment expects them to be. And I think one of the important things that they highlight is that whilst we're all for autistic pride, and we should be, we also need to make people aware of the dangers of unmasking, and that depending on what your environment is, it might put you in danger, and you need to know that, and you need to be aware of that. And then, of course, you make your choice and you make your, but the same as coming out, I suppose. Like, obviously every queer person should come out, but it's understandable that some people can't, and that's why we say you shouldn't force anybody to come out, because you're putting them in danger. So it's kind of the same,
definitely
the same idea. And then go on.
I mean, I think a lot of the things that we try to do is to create safe spaces for, so for some people that can't do that, but they could do it for 2 hours a week with us in an autistic space or trans autistic space is amazing, to be able to gift that to people so that they might feel comfortable for those two hours a week to do that. But yeah, that's totally right. And everyone has different cultural experience. Some places it's just not safe. Oh, and precisely, if I cry, am I no longer a man? If I have long hair, am I a woman? That seems just to count in Brazil. I think related to the last.
I mean, and that's the other thing, that right, on top of playing with gender identity, also playing with how you express the gender that you feel that you are. Because there are a million ways to be a man, there are a million ways to be a woman, there are a million ways to be non-binary, and everything in between. And you define those things for yourself. And of course, there's structural, everybody else is going to try to fit you in the box. Like, you can't just, go anywhere anymore without having to feel like a diversity form, or without being called hi sir or hi ma'am or whatever. And so and more so than that, like there are structural barriers that comes with that, like sexism is a thing. Sorry. To break it to you. So, but like, obviously, or homophobia, transphobia, all of those things. So everybody's gonna face those barriers. Not everybody, but you're gonna face those barriers anyway. But that doesn't mean that you don't have your own agency to define yourself and play with your own perception of yourself however you want to, however difficult that may be at times.
Yeah, and we've got the comment here, exactly, we are allowed, in quotation marks, I think, to queer our queerness, not be a neurotypical heteronormative expectation of male, etc. And yeah, back to the chapter.
Back to the chapters.
Yeah.
So chapter 11 is Olivia's chapter, which Katie already mentioned, called Doing Gender on My Own Terms, My Life as an Autistic Transgender Woman. Again, talking about kind of self-explanatory in the title, how Olivia came to understand herself and her journey, but mostly focused on what she would have needed professionals to know along the way rather than her own thoughts and experiences. So this is what my school teachers would like to know. I would have liked them to know. This is what sort of professionals along the way would have liked to know. And she talked about some really important things, like the fact that she was left homeless and she was put in a men's shelter, like very clearly putting her in danger, for example, or just the variety of times where people kind of disregarded gender identity stuff, or the amount of times that she had to perform a very specific version of femininity just to get access to what she needed. So, for example, one of the, and I think that's really interesting, because one of the main like turf points, I guess, is that trans people reinforce very outdated and sexist gender stereotypes, which isn't true, obviously, and I don't agree with that. But also, if you're questioned every step of the way, how, and nobody believes you, like you'd much rather feel less dysphoric and be in clothes that you wouldn't necessarily choose for yourself, but have people recognize you as who you are, than the opposite, like wear whatever makes you feel comfortable, but have everybody perceive you and cause you like huge mental distress, perceive you as something you are not, and cause you huge mental distress as a result. And also, if gender identity clinics aren't going to believe that you're trying, then they're going to withhold their services. So obviously, it's like a catch-22. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So yeah, people aren't, and I think gender identity clinics in particular are so terrified of being like the center of the hurricane, I suppose, and being the way they've been put in the news. And again, specifically how autistic people have been dragged onto that, because I don't know how much you know, for example, about the Tavistock case, which was a case brought against a gender identity clinic, which has been appealed now, but it was a massive blow to a lot of trans people's confidence, and a lot of trans kids didn't know if they were going to get beta blockers. But one of the main sort of I don't know, complainants or the people who took a case against the gender identity clinic was a parent of an autistic trans person who was accessed their clinic, and she believed that just because the person is autistic, like that kid should have been allowed to I don't know, have beta blockers, and that they didn't know themselves, and that everything was like a symptom of their autism, and that it's so common, like with autism. So, and as if like that makes it like, regardless of whether something is common or not, if you need it, you need it. Food is common. That doesn't mean you shouldn't eat. Like, I don't understand the commonality logic. Like, if something is common, then you don't do it. Okay, cool. Don't know how that works.
And also, like it was just so easy for this child, or any children, or even adults, actually, to get like puberty blockers or HRT or anything like that. Anything that's written about, that is scaremongering towards gender identity or like gender reaffirming surgery is just ridiculous, because these people don't have any idea about not only just the amount of trauma of living in a body that isn't yours or isn't the way that it should be, but then having to, like you say, you've got to go to your GP, you've got to go to a psychologist. They've then got to say that you have a mental health issue
to get help.
You consider to get any kind of help whatsoever. Then you have to either have like gender dysphoria or gender incongruence. You know, you need to have that diagnosed before you're even going to step anywhere. So this idea that this autistic person somehow wandered in off the street and been given all these terrible chemicals to stop their puberty or whatever it was they were getting done is just absolutely ridiculous. They just think that people aren't waiting on these lists for years and years and years and having to show, you know, proof that they've been living in their gender and you know, and that's just recycling ideas on gender stereotypes, because I have to prove that I've been living as a man for 2 years. What on earth does living like a man look like?
Yeah.
I have no idea what that looks like.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And have I felt safe enough to go into a men's restroom? You know, am I going to go from the gay women's rugby team that I'm on to a male-only rugby team? Is that even going to be allowed? So people almost have to pick and choose what it is they're allowed to carry on with for 2 years. So someone somewhere who doesn't have any clue about autism or being trans or non-binary can go, yeah, you're struggling enough. We'll help you.
Yeah,
we'll help
so
you.
put yourself in harm's way effectively for 2 years and have everybody judge you for what you're doing, so that you have the chance to, you know, to deserve my help effectively.
Ridiculous.
So it's a very and also, like, people forget that non-binary transition exists, and more specifically even non-binary medical transition. Like, people forget that is a thing, that non-binary people can have medical transition, and whatever that may mean, they're still non-binary, you know, at the end of the day. I mean, Olivia says it perfectly in her chapter, where she says, like, you'd think that after all this work and all this, like, effort, I would have gone from linearly from point A to point B, and then now it's over. But no, actually, the more I feel comfort in my body, the more I realize I'm non-binary. And it was the body that I wasn't comfortable with, and it doesn't actually have that much to do with my own gender identity. Which I think, again, it's really interesting. But also, so I know of so many non-binary people, myself included in some parts, that just want to change parts of their gendered characteristics or physicality, and not the whole thing. Like, that doesn't make it. I know non-binary people, for example, who took hormones for a while, got the far away from their previous, I guess, body presentation that they were comfortable with, and then they stopped. That's not transitioning. That's not changing your mind. That's not any of those things. That's somebody getting what they wanted from their body and stopping at that. Like, why is that not a something you consider? So, and of course, among all of those things, there are gonna be people who, for whatever reason, change their minds. But there are a lot of things in life that we change our mind about. And some of them are irreversible, but we do them anyway. And again, sorry.
I was just going to say, just for the listener, if they don't know about the case that you discussed at the beginning, about someone who basically changed their mind about their gender reassignment, didn't they? And that's the court case basically was about that. And then they basically said, well, then no one should be able to do it. It was at a young age, because this person changed their mind. Just want to make that clear.
They feel things that this person had and changed their minds anyway. So that doesn't make any sense. Like, this person had all of that support, and they were given all of those things, and they changed their mind anyway. So it's not like you're adding anything extra. You're just saying people can't do it anyway.
Yeah, I think she had. If we're talking about the same person, she had top surgery. Is that right? We're talking about
I think so. But also, like, it's more than one specific case. I think so much, and that's the thing. if you think about what having children does to one's body,
Mm.
and how permanently that changes it. That is a permanent choice you can't take back, and you can't take it back regardless of whether you raise the child or not. How's that not strange? How's that not something we talk about? Or anything else. The other thing, professional athletes, the amount of stuff they do to their bodies to be better at their sport, especially in certain sports like gymnastics, or people who really bulk up because their sport requires it. We're talking about permanent changes. People who, footballers who have become like a hot topic of discussion now, how basically everybody is giving themselves like brain damage to be able to continue play this violent sport a little bit longer, especially in America. The American football, I mean.
Yeah, American football is
like rugby.
Yeah, with the pads and everything, yeah.
And the irony of all of this weightlifting and various other things is that it changes things on like a hormonal level. Yet there's issues with people taking hormones. Funny that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, it just so annoys me. It so annoys me. People doing it in a more traditional manner is absolutely fine, but if you're and like as if men and women have all the same hormones anyways, and some people don't have more testosterone than others.
Yeah.
And you're not testing everybody, so why are you testing? And the fact that when you're on HRT for a certain amount of time, if you were a person who had a lot of testosterone in your body and that's what you didn't want anymore, actually your body stops creating it. Like end of. So you are likely to have less testosterone in your body than a cisgendered, assigned female at birth person. So really basic science. Like I know that. I'm not an endocrinologist. Like I know that. Why doesn't everybody else know this? It's really frustrating.
And that's the thing, like people do all sorts of things to their bodies to serve the purpose they want their bodies to have in life. Right? Like I said before, like my dad is a priest. Greek Orthodox priests have a very specific look. They stop shaving their beard, they stop cutting their hair, and they wear all black top to bottom. My dad's also autistic, and he told me that one of the appeals of being a priest is that he didn't have to groom anymore. And I was like, if you said that in the right room with the right people, I would get you a paper, I bet. But you know what I mean? Like he used his body to communicate to the world what his social role is, right? I am a priest, therefore that's what a priest looks like, and you know that for me just by looking at me if you're Greek. And because in England when he came to visit, people were like, oh, this is strange black shadow walking on the pavement. What's that? It didn't have the same meaning because people don't generally come across Greek Orthodox priests on the streets of Birmingham. So everybody does that. Every single person does that. More or less successfully, more or less intentionally, more or less deliberately. We all use our bodies to communicate something to the world. Like trans people aren't any different in any
very true.
measurable sense in that. We all do it. It's just that what you think that you are allowed to control the narrative over what trans people are and aren't allowed to say with their bodies, which
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
No. Why are people so interested?
I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of people have opinions on things that they know nothing about, which is very difficult.
So going back to the chapters.
Back to the chapters.
The last one.
Okay.
The last one is the experience of gender dysphoria from an older autistic adult, implications for practice. And again, it's written by Wen Lawson. And this is more of a personal chapter talking about his personal experience of transitioning very late in life. And I think one of the important reasons for me to include that chapter is that if you look at academic literature around transness, is so like 99% of it is like trans youth and trans youth and trans youth, as if everybody transitions very, very young, or like young adults at most. And autistic people are particularly unlikely to fit that group.
Definitely.
So you could make the argument that by just focusing on trans youth, you're automatically excluding a big part of autistic trans people from your research, even though you're not doing it deliberately. But like so much of the discourse around transness is about young people and how much they don't know themselves, and which of course other chapters address as well. But it's also important to say that no, people can transition at any age, and somebody might take years and years and years to come to the right conclusion for both internal understanding reasons and societal structural reasons, and the combination of the two. And when transitioning in 60s.
That so echoes the research on autistic people as well, that for so long they just looked at autistic kids and it was like the autistic adults didn't exist. It was just autistic children. And I making the same mistake with trans kids as well.
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
interesting.
And it all goes back to essentialism for me, like the idea that like you're born as this blank canvas, and then you're molded into a person by your parents, by the school, by society, by all of the above together. But the so investigating the canvas is very important, looking what the canvas looks like, because effectively that's what autism looks like. So everybody's canvas is made of paper, and this person's canvas is made of like fabric. And oh my god, it doesn't absorb colors the same way. What are we gonna do? Paint differently? How about that? That's an idea. So but it all
try
goes
something
back to,
else.
yeah, try something else. But it all goes back to essentialism and to wanting to understand like the core of what people are, our obsession with genetics, our obsession with like if we unpack the genetic code, we will somehow understand the entirety of humanity, as if genetics themselves aren't socially constructed, because hello, we talk about them. Language is a social construct. Welcome to my world. Everything is socially constructed to an extent, which doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own nature and its own existence, but our understanding of it is our understanding of it. It's not what the thing is, right?
Very true.
But yeah, anyway, I'm going to stop about that rant. That's the other article that I mentioned.
With talking about autism research and focusing on children and stuff, and it's just perpetuating this infantilization of all autistic people, because even if shock horror, autistic adults exist, obviously we're daft, we don't know what we're talking about, we are confused with our gender, which is why and then it just begats more problems, because nobody seems to want to talk to us, which is why so many of us, I think, all three of us here certainly have kind of got ourselves into research to make our voices heard, because no one's talking to us as participants outside of the autistic community and outside of trans and non-binary communities. So we've had to kind of barge our way in and say, no, this is the way to do it. And I actually got, because the research I did was for 20 to 50-year-olds, and someone got extremely funny with me on my Facebook advert about saying that, I'm 18 and I'm an adult and all this kind of various stuff. And I just thought that, I have to put parameters in there anyway, just, with ethics and stuff. But I just thought, actually, you know what? I wasn't particularly happy about going down to the age of 20. And so maybe for my PhD, I'm thinking like possibly 50 plus, because there's lots of stuff written about kids and young people, and they're obviously an incredibly important part of our community and our society. But, kind of older, and I don't mean older as in, but, kind of more mature people are kind of left to you know, we're talking about people who are, Annette, well old.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, there was a bit of a muffle, but I think you just undid it. So whatever, keep going, Katie.
So I think, you know, we're talking about people who, especially people who are assigned, rightly or wrongly, female at birth, who weren't diagnosed, who were diagnosed with bipolar or you know, emotionally unstable personality disorders, which are fine, by the way, but, you know, when there's misdiagnosis or perhaps there's that alongside being autistic as well. And then, let alone, you know, so we're talking about autism understanding from like 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, it's not brilliant now, but 30, 40, 50 years ago would have been absolutely horrendous. And it's the same with trans and non-binary stuff. So I'm hoping that the young people that we all work with will actually be okay, you know, over the next couple of years. The understanding's coming there, and it's still not great, and it's still not easy to be trans and autistic, and I will never think it is. But, you know, there's a whole host of people who've just been left to the wayside, who don't know, they don't have their autistic realisation, they don't necessarily know that they're trans or non-binary, or that there's different ways of expressing their gender and stuff like that. So I think it's a really important part of the population to talk to, actually.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, I'm 50, so, and just discovering my non-binariness now. And I think I've talked to a lot of people older, you know, like myself, that are just kind of figuring themselves out, you know, just figuring out that they're autistic for one thing, but then kind of, oh, wow, I've got this whole other thing here, my sexuality and my gender that I haven't really dealt with, you know. And I think that a lot of times, yeah, that gets put by the wayside. And I think it's really important to hear from all ages of autistic people about their experience. And that's why I got into it as well. Is I want to hear from other people. I want to listen to other people and learn about myself, I suppose, as well, and learn about the community, because we've just been silenced for so long. And I just wanted to say the comment down here as well, which was kind of based back what you were saying before, Marianthi, but I think it's a really good point. So I'm going to say it again, which I'm from Callum Brazo. Sorry if I'm totally mispronouncing your last name. Very interesting point about changing our bodies to communicate a purpose within our society. Society tells us what our purpose should be, but it's done through a binary lens rather than the human one. I think that really kind of is quite good. Oh, and we've got another one. And finding something in genetics just means you found the genetics. Finding biomarkers does not equate to finding EG disorder or deficit, etc. It's society that decides if something is disordered. Definitely.
Absolutely. And we have examples of people's lived lives changing their genetics and how these pass on to the future generations, right? So nothing is ever just one thing, and it's not. And I think what needs to change is people's obsession with certainty and obsession with the one truth and the one root of all of causes, and as if causes don't have causes and those causes have other causes, and it goes on in perpetuity, and it should, you know. Life is complex, and it's interesting because of that. Trying to oversimplify, and again, if we're gonna really be honest about it, how much of that is capitalism as well, right? So if we know the causes of causes, then we can make people be what we need them to be. And make them be productive and make them be exactly what we need them to be, rather than having them develop in whichever way that may not be monetizable. The horror, you know? So all of these things kind of interact together and shape everybody's minds about that, scientists included. You know, no one's exempt from it. So
I want to go back to something you probably said about an hour ago, but it's stuck in my head, Marianthi. You were talking about what I think that you're currently doing with, you were saying there were people in kind of women's autistic groups, but most of them aren't necessarily identifying as women. I just wondered what you thought about the kind of there seems to be an adage of things now where it's kind of women and non-binary groups, and I wondered what you thought about that.
So yeah, I think it's interesting. So I wasn't talking about something I'm doing now. I was talking about
No,
when I
it's the
started my
paper.
master's. When I
Okay.
started my master's, I didn't even know non-binary people existed, right? And it was because of my master's and because of autistic people that I found out that non-binary people existed. Not surprising in hindsight. But I started recruiting. So my dissertation was how women who were diagnosed in adulthood, what are the experiences of women who are diagnosed in adulthood, about their of their undiagnosed childhood. So that was what I was trying to look into, and I started recruiting people from women's groups, and unsurprisingly, I ended up with a variety of gender identities and a variety of sexual orientations, and the straights ended up being the outliers. But that was 2013. We're talking about 2013 Facebook. We didn't talk about non-binary stuff that much, that in that structured way back then. What do I think about the groups now? I think it's all a work in progress. I'm still in a lot of women's groups, even though I stopped perceiving myself as one for years now. More so because I don't, to be honest, I'm not really that actively engaging, but I am in them, and I've actively chosen not to withdraw from those groups. I think people are still trying to wrap their heads around both how people understand themselves, but I think most importantly, what kind of structures should we have now to make sure that nobody's feeling left out and nobody's feeling misrepresented. And I think therein sort of start the problems, because it all depends on everybody's perceptions of other people's needs, which inevitably are going to be secondhand. Like if you're an admin, you can't possibly ask every single member of your group, what do you think? And if you did, like, you'd get so much headache. And we we can't forget that it's not a paid role. These people just, out of the kindness of their hearts, sort of have organized massive autistic communities online. So I think that it's a work in progress, and I tend to be forgiving of it as of that. I am far more ready to be strict with people who are paid to do things and get them wrong than like criticize people's free labor for being imperfect. Like, you're doing your best. We're all like drowning here. If you made a mistake, okay, that's fine. But at the same time, doing that without invalidating, the new sort of person who's still trying to like find their feet and may wobble in the process, and try to lift them up as well. But I also remember, like, even back in 2012, I specifically remember it because it got stuck in my head. And there was this post in the For Women with Asperger's group, which was the first group that I ever joined on Facebook. So many things I am not anymore. In a group that helped me so much. But a trans woman joined, and kind of made a very shy post saying, hello, I'm here, I am trans, I hope that's okay, I don't want to like impose on your space, and tell me, and if it's not okay, I'll go. But they said, I'm a trans woman. And I remember, as somebody, again, who at that point I was in Greece, I was communicating on Facebook on my second language, right, because my primary language was Greek. And what I knew about trans people was a couple of Hollywood movies that I'd seen. I was like, why is this person getting so worked up about that? Like, if you're a woman, you're a woman, you're here. What does it matter, sort of thing. kind of not having any concept of what their anxiety might have been about. And then so many like people from the group on the post commenting underneath saying, no, if you're not accepted in the group, I'll walk out with you. This is an inclusive space, and if you aren't allowed to be here, then I'm gonna walk out with you. And I see like this discussion, I mean, like, nobody disagrees with anybody. Why is everybody so worked up? And years later, when I kind of got the concept of trans issues and what they are, I'm like, okay, that makes sense now. But good for us. So that was a very heartwarming moment in hindsight. And my naive ass being like, okay, just come. I don't understand the issue.
Yeah, and it's interesting because my research was the same. I started my PhD. I was looking at women who are autistic, and then realized very quickly that, oh my gosh, I don't want to not include people that are being not included, and I realized very quickly that cis and trans women needed to be included, but also non-binary people within my research, because I wanted to be inclusive of everyone and not feel like I felt like I was left out. At that point I was identifying as a woman, and I didn't want to leave anybody else out. That's what interesting, and yeah, to a certain extent you're right about these people are trying their best. They're autistic and they're not being paid for what they do. It's better to kind of call out people that
let's have a space and fix it as we go along, than be homeless effectively, online homeless, right? Let's just have a house and then spit and sparkle, as it were, as we go, and we fix some of the issues along the way. And sometimes it might not work. We might like break down a column and the whole like house collapses on us. That happens. That's part of what kind of doing things together is. But for the most part, I think I see people trying, and I give them that. And that's also kind of, I see how many, I guess that approach of mine also extends to autistic researchers who aren't being paid. Because I've seen so many autistic researchers who basically are doing their PhD out of their pure own, like fueled by their own frustration and anger, like most of us, just like propelling ahead and trying to put a research together. And I guess other autistic people who are not in academia might not know what that entails. I mean, I've had a lot of autistic people, not a lot, but I've had autistic people who don't know anything about academia thinking that I make like 4 digits. And I was like, in what universe, honey?
No.
We're social scientists. Like, who? If I was in genetics research, maybe, but not in my corner of the woods. Sorry.
Yeah.
But obviously, the way some things are portrayed in the media and stuff, which is what people would be drawing their information from, you can't blame them for thinking we are like wear lab coats and drive Porsches to work or whatever. And as is very fairly pointed out, paid or not, we're often used for our emotional labor. But I guess the point
definitely.
that I'm trying to make is that if somebody's putting a research project together out of their goodness of their heart and with whatever spoons they have spare, and they don't get it perfectly right, I am like, I can only get so critical until I have to stop and like really draw on my compassion and be like, but you did your best with what you had available. Like, don't like, and also we've had so much negative feedback in our lives as autistic people that it's really easy to dwell on negative feedback and thinking, oh my god, I wanted to do this like really good thing, and now it's completely blown up in my face. Oh no, sort of thing. And the last thing you want to do is discourage these people from like doing anything further, right? So I guess I also reserve my criticism of things not being perfectly worded for people like that. However, like, personally annoyed I am, because I've seen, for example, so many autistic women doing research on like maternity services and things like that. And it's less so now. I think the more years go on and the more everybody online kind of incessantly talks about gender diversity in autistic people.
Yeah.
Everybody, regardless of or not of where they're at in their own personal sort of gender journey, are getting the message, are changing their approach and their language.
Yeah.
But like originally, they had so much information that was completely triggering to me because it was talked about in a way that I didn't find it accessible, and I had to honor my own upset, that it was a fair upset to have, but also acknowledge that this person also tried their best. And ultimately, who do you think is going to be harder to convince? A poor autistic woman who decided to do a research with not a lot of knowledge, or this like rich neuroscientist who does whatever he wants and it's him and nobody else, and he's got an ego to the sky? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for all of those people, I'm trying to be productively informant and not kind of really tear them down for whatever shortcoming they may have had in the process.
I see that a lot. I don't know if you two see this a lot, but I see that a lot in just kind of autistic spaces in general. I feel like sometimes we're very quick to tear each other down on, especially around language and kind of stuff like that. And I find that actually quite upsetting. I just think, do we not? I think we said this a couple of weeks ago, Annette, actually, when we were talking about biphobia in the LGBT community. And we were talking about, like, do we not just get enough shit from straight people that we're not turning each other? And I feel exactly the same about the autistic community and just the neurodivergent community in general. But some of the people online that I've seen tearing other autistic people down are autistic people. And even like on spelling and stuff like that. And I'm like, so many of us are dyslexic or have other processing things, or don't have the spoons to sort out our writing. And did you understand what I was saying to you? So that's all you need to worry about. You're not my high school teacher. Like, we're not grading this. This is just me talking on social media, and I don't know if you've kind of found the same kind of issues.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I do think there's something going on with your mic, Katie. I don't know if people are, they're saying it's muffled a little bit, but sorry.
I might just put my fingers over it. Is that better?
That is better.
I'm using my phone. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, you didn't hear me at all.
We could hear you. It was just muffled. So yeah, I think that's okay. Oh, there was a good comment up. I thought that we didn't get to say. Yes, Asher Gilbert. As a trans man, I find it so strange when people are discussing female autism experience, because I relate a lot at the time, but also it felt uncomfortable to be like me too. And I think that was one of the things that me and Chloe, we used to belong at the university to a women's autistic group, and then it became a women non-binary and trans autistic group. And then we just thought, actually, it just needs to be an autistic group. And that we just call it an autistic social group now, because so many people identified in ways supposedly that are female autism, which doesn't even exist. It's just an autistic experience, and how varied that is, and how important that is to include everyone. What does Aucademy say? Because shielding, masking should not be gendered. Any autistic person can shield, and that's very true. And a lot of people experience.
And any person does. I also think that idea that, for example, and I'm going to put it in crass terms, because I'm going to express it how non-autistic people think. Low functioning people don't mask. It's ridiculous. Yes, they do.
Yeah, of course they do.
Yes, they do.
All the time.
Yes. Everybody does. Everybody does. Like, and also a lot of, I think everybody does in general, even if they're not autistic. It's just the more socially acceptable who you are is, the less you have to hide, and the more capital there is in your already established social location. So, why hide it? If you don't have a reason to hide it, you don't hide it, right?
Yeah.
So, but people mask, and also people mask for nefarious reasons, right? So people would mask to fit in, like wolf in sheep's clothing or whatever, to fit in with spaces that don't belong to them for other self-serving reasons. Like, so masking for us specifically refers to pretending to not be as autistic as we are so that other people don't give us trouble. But it also means a lot of different things as a process of hiding who you are in a lot of different, like, politicians don't mask. Come on. Of course they do. And that's what I mean, that sometimes masking can be nefarious. You know what I mean? They of course are going to mask their intentions to make themselves look like something else. That's to their benefit. You know, everybody masks to the extent that it benefits them anyway. And this is a game that everybody plays. It's just that when it comes to oppression, masking means something completely different, and it's just a way to deal with the social structures that are imposed upon you, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually no such thing as normal. So even we're all aspiring to this normal, but nobody is that normal. So even neurotypical people will be trying to aspire to a normal and shielding themselves to seem as if they are normal. And obviously that's much more difficult for autistic people to be able to do that. And, we've got Aucademy saying, Rachel Cohn explains that high support need autistics definitely mass shield. I mean, it's totally obvious to most autistic people that that's the case, particularly as they're watched 24/7. Yeah, they don't really have freedom of expression. And that's, oh gosh. I can't believe it's almost 9 o'clock, but I wanted to ask you one last question, just kind of about what it was like to be an editor and kind of an autistic editor, and kind of helpful tips of, if other people are interested in editing or writing in general as an autistic author, because it's very difficult. I mean, we talked about before we even came on with Chloe about how it's very difficult for an autistic academic to publish, let alone somebody who's not an academic, because of the biases there and the emotional labor it takes to kind of do something like that.
I think being really passionate about something helps.
Yeah.
First of all, let's start with that. We have one weapon, let's just blaze it. So I wanted to talk about this topic, and I wanted to talk about this topic with all of these people that I included, and part of me including them in the book was I find them so interesting, so I'm pretty sure a lot of other people are going to find them very interesting, because what they have to say, I don't hear many other people having to say it. So I treated it as as an indulgence almost, that these people are indulging me and are writing it for me. And then, the fact that it's getting published, it's giving them something. In terms of mindset, that's kind of how I positioned it in my head. And also, with a lot of these people are conversations that I would have wanted to have anyway. So, yes, it's a lot of effort, but it's also something we would have done anyway. And the effort is to basically structure it and make sure that it ends up in a format that people who aren't us can understand, In terms of, we haven't talked about that a lot while we were live, but it was very important for me, this book, to not just be written by people who have established names. Obviously a lot of us have worked hard to have the names that we have in the space, and that needs to be acknowledged. But at the same time, a lot of people have a lot of knowledge and expertise and just don't know how to get a leg on, because it's hard for everybody. So I think, and this is something that I will always aspire to do in any work that I do, because it's a good way to have people who are very established sort of draw more of the attention, and then the other people benefiting from it as well. Part of it was that, but then that also needed different strategies. So people who have published and have written, I basically asked them, give me an outline of what you're going to write, and I'm going to give you a word limit, and you're going to submit to it, or else sort of follow it or else, which is like for people who have published is not a very uncommon thing.
Yeah.
To like they're used to word limits. So they would send me their chapter. I would, highlight a couple of sentences and say, clarify a couple of those things and basically leave them to it. For other people who haven't been as experienced in writing, it was a nurturing process. So I didn't, yes, they knew that the chapter had a word limit, for example, but I also told them, don't worry about it because you're not used to writing in that way. Just write, and I'm either going to edit this and send it back to you, or we're going to edit it together if that is something that makes you feel more comfortable. Because I guess the other thing that I was worried about is that for somebody who isn't experienced in publishing, sending your heart and soul to an editor and then have it sent to you basically unrecognizable. I didn't want them to feel like their voice is lost from their own chapter. I needed them to feel like this is something that I will show to my friends or that I will read myself and I will feel like I can see myself in it. And also, of course, like there are certain, I guess, language standards that we have to follow, like sentences need to finish at some point.
Yeah.
And some people struggle with that. There needs to be a full stop at some point because the reader's going to get lost. Or, we need to have paragraphs. I had discussions with people about that. Please, like, we need to have paragraphs. Like, I understand that that's how you speak, but you have to be followed. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I had to figure out where to, like, fight my battles, as it were, and to but I always started from the mindset of I will preserve this person's voice as much as I can, but this is the medium, and that medium unfortunately does have some compliance standards whether we like it or not. So how can we marry the two without making the person feel like absolutely violated for participating in the process? And I think for the most part, because I explained that, people understood.
Yeah.
That ultimately, if we don't do it like this, then your chapter is not going to be in the book. And if your chapter is not going to be in the book, you lose, I lose, everybody loses. So we have to, but at the same time, if something is absolutely fundamentally important to you, then tell me. And, I'll see what I can do. So it was a bit of a back and forth, and it was kind of a dance between us to figure out what kind of the golden line is. But it also took a lot of time, and not all chapters had the same input from me. There are chapters that were basically sent to me 2 days before submission, and I read them, and I was like, boop, there it goes. And there were chapters that we were working for months, and I think that's because that's perfectly like some people would have find this kind of work and this kind of intervention incredibly disorienting, right? For some people, this writing a chapter is like this chaotic thing that I have all these thoughts. How do I put some structure to them? And for some people are like, leave me alone. And if you talk about this with me, I'm not going to continue writing my chapter for another year. So stop talking to me, leave me to it, and I'll do it by myself, and you'll see it when I'm done. And both needed to be honored as processes. So I tried to do that. And finally, I think the thing that I am very self-conscious. I don't like self-publishing. Like, there's a reason I have like 7 publications or 6 publications, and only now I released my first solo author publication. I don't like doing it. I like having feedback from other people in every step of the process. So because I like this collaborative type of work, and I think because as a specialist mentor, I have edited a lot of autistic people's writing over the years. I used those skills to help me put the book together. So my advice to other people who want to be editors is just remember that it doesn't pay well, first of all. So if you have to prioritize things that does, power to you, Nothing's free in this world, unfortunately. But if you're doing it out of your own sort of passion, it's okay if it takes you a while. It's okay if things come and you stop and you start and you stop and you start. That doesn't mean you're not going to finish. If you want to finish, you will finish. Like, there was a point that like people thought that I genuinely stopped working on the book, and I hadn't.
Yeah.
And there were friends that was like, oh, and I was doing things for the book, and they would tell me, is that still happening? I was like, yeah. Why? Just because I haven't talked about it for 6 months? What do you think?
Yeah.
Of course. And we're neurodivergent. Like, sometimes our attention diverts, or we tunnel focus on other things. And so you might tunnel focus on this and then not do it again for 2 months. That's also fine. All of these things are fine, part of the process.
Definitely. Yeah.
And as long as you are all at the same page, that you were going to honor each other's ways of doing things as much as you can, and as much as the system allows you to, then being in a collaborative space can actually be a very beautiful thing.
Mm.
And you can learn a lot from each other. So, but also, like, indulge yourselves, honestly. Like, there's nothing, people think like this editor's job is very difficult, and it is, but it's also like you're getting a first-hand preview of this amazing work that you're super passionate in. Like, oh my, talk about VIP. I had the ultimate VIP access to these people's thoughts. Like, that's great.
That is fabulous. Yeah, just thinking about that. Yeah, that nobody else had read it before, and that you got to read them first and help them bring that to light, so that other people can hear their stories and learn from their knowledge, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
Katie, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
Oh God, I have so many, but we've spoken for perhaps too long already. Maybe.
I know. I feel we need to meet again.
Yeah. Well,
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I love the book. I think it's really, really good. And I love the fact that that people were brave enough to share their personal stories as well. Because there are quite a few things in there, like you were talking about homelessness and various other things there. There was a lot of real kind of personal, very deep stuff going on with some of the people who wrote in your book, and I thank them for it, because it's going to help other people, and not just practitioners who might support people like us, but it's going to help people who are in that situation or have been in that situation. And it's really powerful stuff as well. And I really, really enjoyed the book, and that's kind of what I want to end it on. Really, I think it's good for people who live at the intersection, who work with people or love people or support people who live in that intersection. And it's quite accessible to read. Like, it's professional, but it's not bogged down in kind of academic writing that is going to be quite difficult for people to understand. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a book I keep coming to. I mean, you've seen how many post-its I've got on this thing. For people who can't see, there's probably about 30 or 40 little pink and yellow post-its I've got in there. So this is going to be, referenced quite a lot in my work. So and I'm glad that Just for Things Publishing is doing more stuff in that area as well. It's really exciting to see trans and or non-binary people sharing our stories and our information. And so thank you, Marianthi. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And I think there is a link to Kate. You did a review of the book on Aucademy.
Yes.
There's a link there. Yeah, which is fabulous. So I guess we always end by asking people what their favorite stim is, or what their new stim is that they've discovered lately. And let's see.
And I will. I've prepared that.
Yay.
But before I do, I want to say on what Katie was saying about the difficult experiences in the book. I think autistic people, or many autistic people that I've encountered, are so incredibly selfless and so incredibly ready to say, to not keep anything personally if that information is going to help other people. We're so like, I was talking with an autistic person in Greece, and they were just like info dumping very personal stuff, and like people around him, what are you doing? It's really personal. He was like, why? It's just information. And I feel like we have this approach so much. So like, I want to honor this in the authors of the book, how many of them were like, he doesn't, like, if what I'm going to write is going to help other people, if I could have had that help when I was at that vulnerable point in my life, then, oh my God, then absolutely included. So this, for people who don't have empathy, we're pretty darn empathetic. Interestingly enough. So yeah, that's kind of what I want to say to that. And in terms of my favorite stims, I mean, one of them is stroking the two little beauties here asleep next to me. You can see them.
Oh,
they are two of my cats. The other one's far away. But I absolutely love. It's the most relaxing thing ever. But I also feel like there's an underappreciation of visual stims. Like a lot of people, when we talk about stims, think about tactile stuff and toys and things we play with. I love a good visual stim. So I have 3 things next to me at all times anyway. I have this diffuser who is a diffuser, but is also colory. And
I have one of those.
Now I have all the lights on, so it doesn't show, but when I dim the lights, it's just a joy to watch. Like sometimes and then I have this lava lamp.
Nice. Which
is kind of all the colors of kind of the gay flag as well. If you look at it, and then there's a lot of times that like right behind them there's the TV, and I will put something on the TV and I'll watch the lava lamp instead because it's just so cool. And the last thing, and all of these things are obviously things autistic people recommended to me, and I was like, oh yeah, I think I do need this in my life. I have, where is it? Do you see that little thing on the window? On the top
what is it?
Of my window?
I see something.
It's so it has a solar panel, and it has 2 crystals that rotate, and when it's sunny, it catches the light and it fills the room with rainbows. And it's the
that sounds amazing.
Thing. Like,
I want one.
If you are not a morning person, this thing will make you a morning person because you look excited to wake up to watch it catch the light and like fill the room with rainbows. It's really cool.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, you have to show me tell me where you got that, because I'd love to get one of those.
It was a gift, unfortunately.
Oh no!
If you search for it, I'll search for it. I'll ask the person who gave it to me and send you the information.
Yeah, definitely. That would be great. Yeah. Okay, Katie.
Yeah, my one at the moment is a bit awkward because it's wolf whistling. Yeah, so, and I work with children.
Oh.
With babies, because obviously I have my
baby
at home. So it's very difficult because I'm still not 100% sure if a lot of my stuff is to do with stimming and isn't kind of like tick related. Because once it gets in my body that it's something that needs to happen, it needs to happen. So, or it just like comes flying out of my mouth anyway. So yeah, that's a bit awkward. But that's my new one at the moment. And it's very loud as well, as you can imagine. So, and trying to whistle quietly or do anything quietly is not really my kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit awkward. So never mind.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think that's
in front of loads of children. It's totally fine.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's really important to say that actually stimming is related to all the senses. So every sense has, all sorts of different stims that relate to that. So, like you said, visual stims, you've got auditory stims, proprioceptor stims, for moving in space, and tactile is just one thing. Touch is just one thing that kind of has all sorts of things related. And mine is today, because someone gave this to me. But I've got the flippy, happy octopus, and then it flips reversible to a sad octopus, which I find quite fun to play with. So that's my STEM. Well, thank you so much for talking to us about the book. It sounds amazing, and I need to actually read the whole thing now because I haven't read the whole thing, and it's awesome. And I've just so enjoyed talking to you, Marianthi and Kate, about this.
Thank you for having me.
And I do feel like there was so much that we didn't talk about that we wanted to. We could do a whole nother session. So we'll have to think about that for future.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And thank you so much to everybody that's listening and that will listen. And thank you for Chloe and Simon, who are in the background helping us as well. Fabulous. Okay. We got lots of hearts, which are at the bottom,
Yes.
which are quite nice. Yeah. Oh, and we're not being asked about Mayo, which is interesting because we don't have that. There we go. Mayonnaise or salad cream. That's usually a question that everybody asks. But Marianthi, do you have a preference?
I do.
Yes.
Japanese mayo.
Ooh, Japanese mayo. Oh, I haven't heard that
Kewpie
one.
mayo. Kewpie mayo.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's like heaps better than any other mayo.
Fabulous. Ooh, I like that. That's an added to the mix now. Okay, so I think we're gonna say goodbye. Yes.
Bye.
I'm gonna wave goodbye and say thank you so much for both of you for coming today and
thank you for having me.
Thanks for having
cheers.
me.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.